So today on Deep Thoughts, I want to talk about perfectionism because I've mentioned it several times in episodes, and I definitely have covered in specific episodes like screenwriting what perfectionism needs to be in order to be successful. But I thought, wow, I'm leaving out all these other arts. I'm leaving out some general methodology. I'm leaving out sort of the some basic how-tos and philosophy of perfectionism. And I thought, well, I think one reason why perfectionism escapes a lot of us for several years is that no one ever addresses it with us. And I think that that's why we have to stumble into it, and we have to stumble into it in a very specific way that we fail first in order to understand it. Right? We hand in our stuff, and someone else hands in better. And so we lose the opportunity. Maybe it's not even a competition, but it's a display, and at some point someone's just kicking our butts. And so I think that it's really windy out here today. I think that it's nice if someone just tells you, this is what you got to do to make it work, you know? A nice baccarat. So let's go with the fundamentals of what you already understand, especially if you know, I always think if you can push play on these videos, there's a certain level of intelligence and accomplishment you've achieved in life. If you look at my little thumbnail on this video and it appeals to you, you've got a certain level of morbid curiosity. So I feel like you understand a base level amount of this game, right? Now if someone says, hey, you should be a perfectionist, or you're going to need to be a perfectionist, or no one even says it because most people don't say it. You just live this life and you realize that you would have had a better life had you been a little bit more of a perfectionist, if not a lot more. And everyone who sails past us is the perfectionist. I can almost tell you categorically in my life, anyone who's passed me in my life, anyone who's been there before and achieved more, they simply perfected more. They worked harder than me. They stayed up all night making something happen, you know. So what is perfectionism? All right. I think perfectionism starts out with a coarse brush, meaning a very big brush, right? You're just like doing house painting. You're just trying to get there, you know. And then as you continue working on whatever the heck you're working on, metaphorically speaking, the brush gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And you're never quite sure when you're done. And the truth of the matter is you're never done. If you were God, maybe you would know when you were finished with something. But in terms of humans creating something, I was going to say humanity, and then I switched, so it's like really word there. You'll hear this throughout your life in different disciplines, which they'll say that nothing's ever finished. You just push it out the door. And I can definitely say in video games, it's definitely the way it works. With script writing, yeah, it's pretty much the same thing. You can always make something better. It's like going to the gym and you lift a bunch of weights and you're thinking, well, am I done? It's like, well, I don't know. What was your goal? It looks pretty close to the goal you had. I'm sure you could continue working, you know, just a little bit of your shoulder there, a little bit of your bicep here, and you could always make it a little bit better. Unfortunately, commercialism in the world has got us believing that our true goal is to make everything better, including our spouses and our children, our toothpaste, the Windex. Everything is supposed to be better. That's really what you're going for. And unfortunately, it's infected our minds with our spouses. It's a hell of a thing to say, and I'm going to divert just for a split second, but this is sort of the mindset that we're trying to crawl into, right? You know, the perfectionism is like a Jeffrey's tube in the Star Trek Enterprise, right? We're crawling way up to this area where the perfectionism node is, right? And it's going to be tough and rough, so we're going to move in there with some different thoughts, try and give it more dimension as we get in there, right? But you know what it's like in a relationship. We're all trying to find, I just had this conversation with a friend of mine, we're all trying to find the very best person to be with before we lock it down with a ring, you know, as far as most of us are concerned, you know, sacrificing 50% of our stuff if it doesn't go right. So we're trying to figure out what's important to us. What is the goal with another human being? Do we want sex? Do we want intellect? Do we want good-looking kids, big tough kids? A buddy of mine always says, we're either predestined to make good boys or good girls, and that's it. You could have a wife that makes good boys and a father that makes good girls, or opposite, and that's what you're going for. So there's all these different, touch points, attributes that we're looking for in human beings, that we're trying to get this perfection before we get there. But then when you turn on the television or turn on the movies, and the styles have changed, right? Your wife was really hot in the 21st century, first decade of the 21st century, and then they switch all the fashions, and then, in your brain, marketing companies have sold you on bullshit. In the second decade, you look at your spouse, you're like, oh my gosh, he or she just doesn't really, it's not really working out for me. Because they're trying to teach you to never settle down, never be okay with what you have, One of the great things I like to remind people of, and I've oddly never heard this said by anybody else, it's really strange. If you go back in time and you look at how classical music formed, and you look at how many decades and, quite frankly, centuries that classic music has been accepted as is, right? And definitely went through some mathematical evolutions from the more. It was almost like furniture going from like, what is it? It's like Louis X up to like a Chippendale's chair, right? You have big clunky chairs, clunky furniture. Gets up to this wispy, beautiful, eagle claw, holding a ball, footrests on chairs. Classical music definitely went from its Beethoven's to its Bach's to its Mozart's, right? But it took a long time to do this. And today, because it's a marketing machine that's trying to sell a new product, we literally have to throw away the previous decade's worth of stuff. Although that's not happening as much anymore because the talent's not there anymore. The government's trying to make everybody as stupid as possible. They're trying to reverse the algorithm of your mind such that this perfectionism concept may just be lost forever. Now, there's always people who find it, but if the people who find it and the number of people who find it reduce throughout time, the world's going to become kind of a weird place. For those who still hang on to it, well, they're going to be selling their products left and right, But what's weird is, it was like if you liked the Beatles in the 60s, you weren't allowed to like them in the 70s. They barely existed in the 70s. But, there was 70s music, 80s music, 90s music. You have to throw it all away. You have to throw it away. Because a marketing department told you to. The most basic form of brainwashing is repetition. Just tell you things over and over and again, and all of a sudden you believe it. I don't know if I'm immune from that either. So perfectionism. Perfectionism is, first and foremost, you divorcing yourself from any pre-regiment that you've heard from other folks as to what is perfection. But you have a lot of pressure to adhere to previous methods. Previous methods of thought. And I'm just going to go through some of the areas and then we'll riff out of them that I think perfectionism exists. And I did sort of touch on this in being an artist because it is sort of it's the final key turn to being an artist in a lot of areas. The key to perfectionism is the following. I always talk about patterns on the show, and patterns are what we are genetically used to. I try to say that there really isn't a thing called racism. There's really a thing called tribalism. We don't really care what color you are. If you're just different than us and we can denote that difference between the two people, then we're afraid of you on a genetic level. With perfectionism, society gets used to patterns. And if you're going to get into a stream of consciousness, which is painting, music, whatever the heck you're doing, you are going to be in that stream of consciousness of patterns. For instance, what if you're going to design a car today? It's a pretty heavy concept. Most people don't go to Art Center and design cars. But what if you're one of those guys or girls that knows how to You could basically design a car. External fenders, seating area, internal cockpit area. You understand proportions. You understand the box that they have to be inside of. You're familiar with the various engines that are available and chassis. And you're going to design a car. All right. You know right away that there is a constraint right now in everyone's mind as to what a car looks like. You have your commercial cars, which are all farty and gross. And then you have your super high-end cars, which are all phenomenal and amazing, as if it costs more money to shape the metal a different way. I think that's what's really funny. It's always been confusing to me when I saw an ugly car as a kid. I thought, isn't it the same amount of steel as this Ferrari over here that can't seem to make enough of these cars to satisfy people who want them? Why is it that everyone oohs and ahs instantaneously over sports cars or even fine sedans like a Maserati or something, and Toyota, Ford, Chevy, other than the Corvette, nobody remotely tries to make a sexy car. And obviously now they're breaking through with, I think Toyota's got a few really cool cars. Everyone's got one little neat little car, but why ever make a shitty looking car? Why ever do it? And that's because there's patterns and constraints and inertia in the brain of man. And these people up in the Detroit, they subscribe to that. So if you're going to design a car, you're going to have to make a decision as to, well, are you going to let those constraints control how you touch metal or how you touch your pen to the piece of paper? Are you going to design your car by going off and looking at all the other cars and stealing headlights and taillights and door moldings and windshields and then Frankenstein something together and then smooth it out over time? You see it happen all the time. All the taillights of all the kind of the high-end European cars, BMW and Mercedes are stealing taillights from each other. And of course, the Japanese come out and steal everything from Europe eventually. So everybody's doing all these LEDs, like flowery, crazy Tron lights. It's wild. The amount of influence that car has on, or that movie had on cars and design today, it's crazy. I just drove a Jaguar last night. And I'm telling you, man, this thing is a Tron legacy car. It's like this beautiful black cockpit with these various leathers. It's not all black, but most of the molding is. And everything has these beautiful, kind of baby blue pinstriping on it. You open the door and the whole door has like this Jaguar logo that's lit up on the bottom with pinstriping on it. It's great art. Tron 1982 looked like no other film on planet Earth, and they copied it in Legacy and blew it out. The designs are phenomenal, and see how that is utterly changing the mind of everyone. It's fantastic. It's weird when you smoke. Sometimes you lose your ash, and I was just making some gestures with you guys, and I sort of have to make sure it doesn't hit my seat, and it's like just disappears. It's like the phantom ash. I have no idea where it will land. It didn't land on my body. Didn't land on my chair. I can't see it on the ground. It's a ghost turd, one of those things. So you're going to design a car or design anything. You're going to have to look at the industry that exists there before you get there. And then you're going to have to push into it, right? And figure out, do you have the next stage of design, the next stage of what something should look like? A really good example of, I think, perfectionism was the early Apple computer company, especially up to about, I would say almost up to Steve's death, But you had these clunky computers, and again, when the Apple computer, Apple I came out and then Apple II came out, you had a household without a computer. Nobody had one of these things. And the one thing that Steve Jobs prioritized out of Steve Wozniak's design was to create something beautiful. He said, it needs to be an appliance in your house that you feel proud to display, something that looks amazing. And he added that perfectionism to the external mold of it. In fact, he had to sell his VW van in order to pay for the mold to get this thing designed properly. And it came out gorgeous. It's got this beige computer box. In fact, there's some black ones first, then the beige ones. And then eventually what kind of gray, platinum looking. But this dedication to perfectionism is all about sort of taking what you have and surpassing what you thought was possible. And I'm going to tell you this much. If everything you did was totally easy and fun, then you haven't touched perfectionism yet. Perfectionism is about the pain of your relative skills being engaged. What does that mean? Well, there's an interesting thing that happens in artists who happen to fall into success. Now, there's rare cases where perfectionism never shows up and they still make it. But let's just say you serendipitously do something and people notice it. And let's say we take it one stage further. You're one of the lucky people to have someone actually sell your stuff. And so you've now got some notoriety and some people that want to buy what you have. And all of a sudden, what started out this kind of loose hobby of yours, or maybe you fully intended to make it a career, but before you felt like you were there, it happened to you already because you're just that damn good. There's something you did. You spun it differently. You turned it 90 degrees, right? And then everyone's watching you all of a sudden. And all of a sudden you're like, whoa, I haven't really achieved my level of perfectionism yet. And again, if you were to create something, like if I were to sit here and it was not windy and I had an easel and a bunch of paint and I just started filming myself painting and you guys just watch me real time paint. One, I'd want to make sure that you were entertained at the level you want to be entertained. If you're coming to watch me paint a spaceship, well, that spaceship's got to be pre-designed and kicking ass. I will have done a lot of due diligence to make sure what I'm about to put on canvas is tight. And then I've got to block it in. I've just got to get the thing to exist on paper, to get it to read to you on paper. Just get the basic fundamentals in place. And so you're watching this, and you're oh, I see it. Yeah. Oh, this is mildly entertaining. This is kind of cool. Now, let's say I finish that without feeling any pain. I just blast this thing up there. Now, maybe if I created a little contest where I said I'm going to only paint for 1 hour, and we'll just see what we can do in 1 hour. And the goal is to have something finished. Every single, millimeter on the canvas is covered, and the concept's fairly tight. But right away, if I said I'm going to only paint for 1 hour, for a fact, it's not going to be that good, no matter how talented I am. Now, if I keep going on that canvas, maybe I do a series, or we just keep the, YouTube Live going, and you start seeing me put in the details, the fine window work, the fine shading work. I put up some highlights. I start doing hot and cold casting of light onto the ship to make it have some dimension. Now your mind starts blowing, right? Okay. At that point, I start hurting in a very revered way to my genetics. I like the hurt. Because I know that as I hurt and as I think things up, and as I experiment on canvas and I try a shadow and it doesn't work and I have to wipe it out, and you see that happen, I know that once we pull back and it looks utterly phenomenal, it looks like a Yamagata, day-night street painting out of Paris in the 1800s. When it looks like that spaceship scene, and I've got little tiny fighters, having little sub-battles off to the side, something you never thought of, scenarios there. I put the nebula in, I put Earth back in the background, which then totally casts the painting in a different setting. It's no longer deep space. This is some battle off the shoulder of Earth, right? Then your mind just starts blowing every second that I start adding some interesting story to the painting and the detail to make it read, I used to draw lots of faces. I used to just do portrait work. It was one of my favorite things, to sit down with someone and just draw their face. And it's been quite a while since I've done that. But if I did it, what I ended up doing was I built a regiment, which was really, really fun. I would draw your face and your hair and your everything, right? And all I would do is draw the outline of everything. I mean, the outline of your eye, your eyelight, all that stuff, the general shape of your hair, your chin, your lips, all that, just the shape of your nostril, the outside edge of your nose, all that stuff, right? But I wouldn't fill it in until the last second. And the funny thing is everyone looking over my shoulder, no matter how talented they were sure I was making mistakes, because they looked at this and they went, who is that? The amount of times I had, who is that? When I'm staring right at the person. It got to be Frustrating at first because I was like, screw you, man. What do you not tell what I'm drawing? It's the person right in front of me. But then I started to get off on it because I had people sitting, and I said, if you're going to ask me that question, you stare over my shoulder the whole time. And I'd switch pencils. I'd get my 4B out, and I'd start putting in all the darkness, all the pigment in the eyes, all the shadows in the lips, fill in those nostrils. If they had dark hair, fill that in. All of a sudden, without changing the line structure, the face just went boom and came out at you. And then I'd start, doing my thumb rubbing to pull in shadows and stuff like this and give true contour to the face and start getting it to be, very close to photo real black and white. And all of a sudden, everyone's mind would blow in the room. And I did that on accident once, and then I started doing it on purpose. And that last step was them watching the perfection of it all. And it was always about an hour or so, right? Maybe a little bit less. But the fundamental definition is it's detail work that hurts. But there's a trick to it. If you're an artist of any kind, you know that what I'm about to say is true, but I want you to hear it come out of somebody. So one, you remember it, but two, it becomes something that you don't feel guilty about. You're like, guilty? What are you talking about? Perfectionism, guilt? Okay. You'll either be in the pocket or in the zone, or you're not in the pocket and you're not in the zone. What does that mean? Well, if you wanted to do something artistic and you were energized to do it and not just exploring, then you were in the mood to do what you were doing. But you're not to feel guilty if during the process you fall out of the zone. Now, it could be that you're still in the zone to create art, but the subject matter that you chose is not working out for you. Some interesting things have occurred to me during those cycles. I was just doing some storyboarding for a film I'm writing because it just got on top of me. It was like, this character needs to be drawn out. I just need to do it. And he's kind of a CG character, so it makes sense for me to draw him. So I started drawing this guy. Just a portrait of his face. And first one I thought, wow, I nailed it. Okay. Second one, I experimented with the geometry. I changed things. I was like, yeah, that's okay. Third one, I was like, oh, this is the junkiest one. I made some stupid choices in the way that this face looks. I drew a third or fourth one and a fifth one. Okay. So I was tabbing through, and I had my notebook, and I would love to make this notebook just a whole storyboard of my film. It's never going to be that precise, but anyway. I went back to that third one, and I thought, well, I got Twilight Zone playing in front of me here, and I'm just chilling, and I still feel like I'm in the zone, But I feel like this was a disaster, this particular face I drew. And, so what I'm saying, I don't want you to confuse with it going, you jumping out of the zone. I took that face, and I kept drawing on it, I thought, what if, and I've done this a lot since I was a kid, you play little games with yourself like a contest, right? You say, okay, what if somebody brought you this picture and said, you have to make this work. You've got to make this face. Add more lines to it, whatever you got to do. Fill it in, but you have to start from here. And so I'll do this contest with myself. It's like, okay, I have to fix this to make it look presentable. So about 5 minutes more drawing, I started looking at it. I was like, wow, this looks pretty cool. 10 minutes more, 15 minutes more. All of a sudden, the third one was my favorite. Absolutely crazy. And I like the fact that third one's my favorite because of one thing. Whatever my mind was thinking when I drew it, I drew so completely out of the pocket from what I came to the piece of paper expecting to draw that I feel like that's what the audience, if they were to see this character now, if they saw this drawing or a derivative thereof or something inspired from it, they'd be like, oh my God, I never imagined him to look like this, but it looks cool. I'm soaking it in. I'm adapting to this sort of alien being that I'm looking at here because he's not human. And that's sexy. That's cool. But there is a moment when you fall completely out of the zone. And the only way I can describe it to you is like the following. you will feel your battery go dead. And you will feel like you're all of a sudden in an empty room. You all of a sudden feel maybe like you got to go to bed. Something weird depending on what time of night you're doing this or time of day. And that's your sign to go ahead and take a break. Take a break for now. Could be you taking a break for an hour. Could be a day. Could even be a week. But you're not to feel guilty between that feeling and the next time you get that feeling. And this is why I like to have multiple disciplines in my life, multiple things I love to do. That way I get the off button turned on to art. So now I'm no longer interested in art. I'll go pick up my guitar. I'll play my guitar for a little while. It never was on. I just thought it might be nice to play my guitar. All right. Go in the back room, bring up my screenwriting software. I start writing a scene. Oh my God, it's working great. This is where my pocket is. And that's how I round robin around my place. And I've got more. I finally bought more paint supplies. I'm going to start painting some of my concepts here. So the other thing is you could tie everything together. So I'm writing a new film. Today I'll have the last act finished. It's been a couple of years of thinking it up. About 3 months straight of writing the thing. Okay. And then I start the perfectionism of going up and down my script and making it perfect, like all the stuff I said in the rewriting thing. But it could be, and I'm not necessarily doing this, but I'm going to storyboard it. I've written it. I'm going to storyboard the whole thing. And I could, if I was delusional, try to write a soundtrack to it. As if a studio would ever need to hear that. I'm not that good. But I could do that. If I was Daft Punk 2.0, I had, I've got all the music software in there to do whatever I want to do. Or I hit an epiphany where I got my keyboard and I got my software, blah, blah, blah. And I start putting down something, even if nothing else, just something to inspire me as I go through the rewrite. Maybe I do write the notes of the theme song. It's not good enough for anyone to hear, but it's like Danny Elfman does. He writes all this crazy stuff and he blows it out with his home keyboards and then he takes it in and an orchestra performs his stuff sometimes. Now, Danny can handle all of his own shit too, but so you see where I'm going with that. I could take everything in the house that I do and fold it into a single project. And then it's like I'm just hovering around the project and I'm seeing it from different dimensions so that when I get into the actual perfectionism of things are occurring to me on a dimension that is I've seen this movie 50 times and I'm just starting to see this other layer of brilliance because I put everything in there from different perspectives. It's an advanced concept, but there you go. Now, perfectionism in art. Let's talk about painting and drawing very quickly and very specifically. There's two. You have your core illustration or painting, right? The core concept of what you're putting together. Now, if you're going to get into illustration of any kind, I'm going to tell you, and I made a mistake in the screenwriting software. The screenwriting rewrite episode where I actually said the name Sid Mead. I meant to say Sid Fields. I said do it the Sid Mead way, and I really meant to say the Sid Fields way. Now, Sid Mead is a very good friend of mine, and I've worked with him for about 17 years now. But Sid Mead is this huge, amazing film designer, production designer. He did, Star Trek 1, almost all of Blade Runner, half of Tron. He's the reason why the light cycle exists. At least the way it looks, both in Legacy and the first one, because they basically were able to realize his designs in the second one that they weren't able to realize in the first one, which was that the bike is part of your body. That was his initial design. Now, if you're going to get into any sort of illustration, I don't care what type of illustrating you do. It doesn't have to be science fiction. You got to go look up Sid Mead. And if you can, get his DVDs, go get them from the Noman Group. Make sure you can have them. But the main thing that he does that fuels perfectionism is he puts it into a scenario. So if someone came to Sid Mead and said they're selling this cigar, this Baccarat cigar, what Sid would not do is just paint a really nice cigar sitting on some ledge or something, burning in an ashtray. He's going to have probably 5 guys and maybe 1 girl all smoking cigars, and they're all going to be They're going to be in some fun mode. There's going to be futuristic spaceships around him probably, because that's what he does. But he's going to put the cigar in a scenario. And that's going to give you a lot more opportunities to add dimension to, one, the sales pitch, but also just your fun in rendering things, right? And I'll tell you what, there isn't anything you can't put in a scenario. He was hired to do a painting for a Japanese company that made these really cool wheels for cars. They had the special technology where they could cut out of a slab of steel any shape, which today is now low-hanging fruit. But when he was hired to do it, I think it was the 80s when he was hired to do it. If I showed you that painting, you wouldn't believe what you were seeing would be the rims, because he had a couple cars parked in this really cool landscape, and in the background was this beautiful party going on where everyone's dressed really cool and spaceships are landing and people are getting out and getting valeted. But these two physical cars that were on the ground with tires were parked in really cool angles. And the sheer reflections that this guy paints, and it's just mind-blowing when you see it. But it was all about the wheels. And so that company got a chance to sell the wheels and kind of show people this is the world you're heading to if you put these cool wheels on your car. It's almost as if Sid's initial take is perfectionism. I'm going to blow this thing out way farther than you ever thought, just from the very get-go. And then I'm going to add perfectionism on top of that. Right? Now, Sid has 2 DVD sets. One is his Hypervan set, and the other one's a brand new one he just released, which is sort of a mothership sitting in this bay on the ground. I haven't seen the second one myself, but the first one is... it's 4 DVDs, and it's 4 hours. No, sorry, it's 4 DVDs. So it's 8 hours of the main program, 2 hours a pop on every DVD. So that times 4 is 8. But he's also got an hour of extras on every one of the DVDs. So you actually get an extra 4 hours on top of this. So you essentially get 12 hours of Sid Mead doing something. And let me just tell you why that's special. I've known the guy for 17 years, and he's definitely given me advice over the years on how to illustrate, but it wasn't until he made that Noman DVD that I really heard how he does what he does. Now, I saw him physically do, but I had to deduce what I was looking at. But in terms of him explaining his stuff, it was this format on these DVDs that gave you the first glimpse of how he does what he does. Now, what people didn't realize, which I had witnessed, but even I didn't know to the extent of which he did it. We're talking about perfectionism, right? If you hired Sid to draw a spaceship for your movie, which happens all the time with this guy, he's 82 years old and he is 62 at best, right? He draws probably no less than 1,000 pen sketches of your spaceship from all different angles, different concepts, different body shapes, everything. 1,000, and I'm not being facetious, okay? Probably on occasion it's less than 1,000 by maybe 50, but in most cases it's a couple hundred over 1,000. Once he gets the ship figured out and you approve of it as the director or the production designer or both, he then starts figuring out what scenario to put it in based on your script. So Sid sort of inverts the process. What would you and I do? Well, as a layman, we might just start sketching right on the canvas, right? Sketch right on the canvas this spaceship design. And then perfect it within the canvas. But the problem is we don't like erasing our lines. So we're going to draw a bunch of lines that we're going to be committed to, which we actually don't want to be committed to. Sid doesn't do that. Sid draws it all on pieces of paper, big giant pieces of I think it's like 11 by 17 pieces of paper, and just fills up every nook and cranny, and then he throws it into this container he has off to his right, and he just draws another one and another one, another one. Anything that reads really well, he puts a star by it, and then he folds that design into the next page. But he'll put a star by something, advance it up, another 100 drawings, and go, no, that sucks. Maybe it needs a wheel. And he worked on John Carpenter's Mars movie, created this gorgeous vehicle with these amazing tires. Well, he drew the tires for 200 drawings, you know. And that might sound crazy, like, oh, God, I don't want to get involved in anything to that level. All right. You won't be Sid Mead. Sid Mead shows up to a car show, or he shows up to a book signing, or he shows up to Comic-Con, and you'll have these star-studded actors sitting at booths waiting to give out autographs. And, of course, they get a line, but the line for Sid Mead's around the building. And if you were to interview and talk to people in that line, they're all geniuses because they understand there's a living Da Vinci on this planet, and his name is Sid Mead. He's a place you can go right now just to look at his stuff online. Just look up SYDMEAD and just go to Google and click on images after you search on that and just look at that stuff. And I'm going to tell you everything that you see, unless someone's doing a tribute to him in 3D software. But everything you see him paint is watercolors. Not watercolors like when you and I were kids, but something called gouache. Gouache is a fully opaque watercolor, so it behaves a bit like acrylic. But in the end, it's actually just as fragile as anything. If you take any one of his paintings and they get wet, it's all gone, So I use Sid as a litmus test for perfection. And it doesn't matter if I'm writing or not. Now, fortunately, I'm surrounded by people that are perfectionists in everything that they do. So I have 3D rendering guys that do perfectionism at Blizzard. I have a writing mentor that's a perfectionist at writing. And I'm just going to tell you that I got some feedback from the screenwriting from a couple of you guys, and the general consensus was, wow, I never knew how difficult this was. Makes complete sense. And that's cool. Don't let it get you down. Because if you're willing to walk through the eye of the needle even conceptually, you're willing to say, okay, I don't know how to get it to this level yet. I haven't done it yet. You may actually know how to get it there, but you haven't done it yet. You haven't tried yet. If you're willing to go through the Stargate of perfectionism and you get to the other side, and when you get to the other side, it might be a hostile environment on the other side. You're already more than halfway there, if not at least halfway there, to commit to going to the other side of the consciousness that you have been sold as a kid, which is good enough, right? One of the unfortunate things that's happened, and this is actually a real world thing, and this might disturb some of you, might even offend a couple of you, depends. I doubt it, but China, who's a big player now in all things manufacturing, they're not known for quality products, right? They're just not. They're for cheap knockoffs. No slight to them. That's just what they would probably tell you the same. But there's a genetic reason for that. And this has happened multiple times in different areas of the world, not just China, but China's the biggest one, the most popular one right now that it's happened to. And I mentioned this briefly in another episode, but since we're on perfectionism, the one thing that China has not been known for worldwide is perfectionism. There's videos all over the internet. If you look up Chinese architecture, there's just fail videos or fail picture collages where they build things completely crazy. It's like at no point do they ask the question of functionality, But there's a reason why it's like that in China. When Mao rose to power, and for several decades before he rose to power, China was in a massive civil war. And Chinese civil wars are really weird. They go for like 3 decades, then they stop. There's a bit of a shifting in power, and then they go back into a civil war for a couple more decades. And it must be really subtle. I don't know, but Mao got to a point where, and Pol Pot did the same thing in Ethiopia. You had, I think it was Ethiopia. One's Vietnam too, but leaders over time have killed off everyone in the population that intellectually knows that they're a hack. They literally round them up and they murder them. And, in the last 150 years, I believe the number is conservatively 40 million Chinese intellectuals were murdered. Pol Pot, he killed anybody with glasses. The problem is when you kill off 40 million of your scholarly heads of state, the problem is that you no longer have that perfectionism thing that I'm bringing you. To some teacher to sit over your shoulder and go, well, that's good, kid, but that's about 25% of your skills. Let's take it the rest of the way. And so China has a really hard time perfecting anything. When I was in the video game business, Electronic Arts tried to create a big Shanghai institution over there, which is in the more domesticated area of the country. And they tried to program, a bunch of companies did this, but EA, I think, spent about $150 million trying to create this Shanghai headquarters over there. And China's been really good about if you have something that's very functional, black and white, such as hand-animated cells, they're good at like, hey, fill that with red. Here's your chart of what the character's outfit looks like. Fill it with red, fill it with black there, da-da-da. So back in the 70s and 80s when they helped with animation, it was very cut and dry. And Japan was fantastic at this because Japan has that finishing touch thing, right? Japan is a perfectionist society if there ever was one. But the honor and sense of nationalism that's related to China, it lacks perfectionism. Now, I'll tell you this much, they're trying to get it. The young kids of China right now are very westernized, and they understand that they need this perfectionism thing, and they're going after it. So I can tell you in probably 20 years, you're going to start to see that intellectual bubble inside China rise up, and the government is trying to push it down. So the CCP is trying to make sure that these kids never really intellectualize up. But at the same time, they're trying to ride the fine line between, but we know that we can't get into certain types of manufacturing and the arts because we lack this gene that was killed off by our former leader, which they still revere, right? So the one thing that we could never get was a finished product over there. And we try to have their software engineers program a video game. The only way you can do it, I've got a couple of friends of mine that do it over there. American McGee's one of them. You have to sit on top of them, and you have to grab these young kids that want perfectionism, and they're looking for the mentorship. They want to be perfectionists, but they just, when do I stop? No one is answering that question for them. And so, so I kind of have a good news, bad news thing about China. The older crew is just trying to get a paycheck, right? They live in a communist country. They know their country's full of crap. Not that ours isn't, but they know they're being repressed. And they're just sort of like, just give me the paycheck. Just good is enough. And then you have this contingency of kids that are going to be like pushing the envelope of everything. And I can't wait to see it happen because it's going to make the world a better place, right? I even had a friend of mine, an employee of mine, who was, I think, born and raised here. But his family was close enough back to that CCP generation that he lacks the ability to perfect anything. He couldn't finish something. He couldn't follow instructions. If I said, we have to do it right by doing it this way, because if we don't, we're going to pay a huge price at the end of this tunnel, he would just look at me and do the easy way, and then we'd automatically run into those problems. And it killed a 4-year project by that lack of standard. But there was no accountability either to perfectionism and doing it right. So there was no what I call pride. And pride, biblical pride's bad, but the pride that you have when you're a fine artist is your accountability to your product. You can fake things for a long time, but eventually when it comes out that you're not what you are, it's as if everything you just did gets erased, right? It'd probably be like, I don't know, you have some weird anomaly with yourself and you're, you hear this all the time of people who are homosexuals. They get into these heterosexual relationships and they think they're just going to be able to undo their genetics, or whatever it is, their preference, and they get deep inside of a relationship, and then they obviously at one point gain the courage to flip back to what they really are, and then that sabotages the whole family, right? Happens all the time. You have to be honest with yourself, install your pride, install your self-respect. America was based off of all these immigrants coming over from Europe that had pride in what they did. And that's one reason why I don't really fear the Mexican immigration. Because at least Mexicans have pride and they have craftsmanship. They may not have the exact know-how in all areas to take it to that next level, but if they're going to get there, right? Most of the interior designers here in Southern California, they use Mexican labor in these really cool warehouses in L.A. to create all their furniture for these ultra millionaires or billionaires. And they're paying for it because the quality is good enough to satisfy someone who has eaten the very best meals, driven the best cars, live in the best homes. When the furniture shows up, there's no problem. They're like, yeah, that's good, man. I like it. Here's your money. So we're doing it again with our brothers from the South. They're coming in and making things happen. They're not terrorists, right? They're not people faking that they're from other countries that they're not from. They're not entitled to anything when they get here, Now they get entitlement when they get here, and there's definitely some problems with immigration, but overall, I think America's winning. currently. Now, if we get a bunch of, again, jihadists over here pretending to be Syrian or something, we're going to have a problem too. So when it comes to art, I was going to say this just strictly for music, because I've been involved with that too. What I would say with the perfectionism in music is the one thing that, and I want to make a mention about the butterfly theory so I want to put a pin in that. I'll come back to that in just a second. But with music, it's textures. It's the voices of the instruments working together. One reason why I have a love-hate relationship with bands that have a certain number of people in the band. Let's say you put a band together, and the band is the constraint on your music. This is something that Prince never dealt with, because Prince would go into a laboratory in his house, and he'd make whatever sounded good. He didn't put things in that didn't sound good. Like I said in a previous episode, the song Kiss doesn't have a bass guitar in it. What if his bassist from Revolution said, where's mine? Where's my role in this song? He's like, well, dude, you're going to sit this one out. And the guy's all protesty and, God damn it, I need my bass guitar in there. He's like, well, then the song's going to sound like crap. Like I said, Prince did create a version that started out with the bass that he toured with a little bit later. But you do what's right for art. There's no constraints. I mean, you can make it a game for yourself and include everybody in there, but when you're by yourself creating a piece of art, you just simply do what's right. So hopefully if you're with a gang of people, a band, you'll always stick to what's right and not what just is making someone feel good about themselves, right? Hell, tell them to go in the back and dry off their face. You know, this is where you take a break and you get to pee while all of us are out there squeezing one off, right? But there's this theory of the butterfly, and it was brought up by Johnny Ives at Steve Jobs' eulogy at Apple. So Steve was already in the ground, and everybody just came together and talked over a podium at Apple. And Johnny's one of the only guys I really want to listen to talk about Steve. I don't want to hear Tim Cook talk about Steve. Tim Cook is a fucking robot. Let's just say that. He's a robot with a very intense limiter on his emotional spectrum. But Johnny said that Steve told him at one point that a good idea is like a butterfly. It's this fragile thing. And if you want to catch it, you can't just grab it with your hand. You have to catch it with a net. And then you have to be very careful with it as you nurture it up to whatever stage you want to take it. Pull it in to make it an idea. So when it comes to perfectionism in art, what I don't want to do is turn you guys into left brain robots. Well, he said there's rules about how to do. I have to sketch a bunch and da-da-da. All right. I don't mean to take away the butterfly. The butterfly is the idea that swam into your brain. That's a very right brain experience. It's very loose, and it's where magic happens. It's literally the inceptional magic of almost everything that happens to you, right? When I come up with the ideas for my scripts, it's usually not because I sat down and intensely thought about my script idea. This morning, I just came up with a film, a first scene of a film, an act one scene for a film that's just so left brain comedy. I started laughing in bed, and I just saw it happen. I didn't do anything. I didn't wake up going, it's time to write a comedy. I just saw a scene, this banter between a husband and a wife. And I thought, well, where would I take that script? And I figured out, I know where I can take it. There's an existing comedy franchise out there that I could push this at. Doesn't have to be them, but it'd be fun if it was. So I'm going to work on a little treatment at some point with that. That's me catching the butterfly. But I let the butterfly fly in first. I let it define itself first. It's what I talked about in the creative episode, where it's all about the sort of the spirits that descend on you and give you things. Why would they give me a screenwriting idea? Well, I'm knee deep in screenwriting right now. I'm neck deep in screenwriting. I'm like right here, So of course they're going to give me that idea because I have scripts open on my computer. I'll just hit new and throw in some notes, right? I'll probably just do it in pages, but I don't mean to make you a robot with this. Perfectionism is sort of the intellectual extension at the end of the journey to push it into that something that makes everybody freak out. Sid Mead has something that he and his buddies in Detroit used to call the, pardon the phrase, but it's bird shitting. What the hell does that mean? They would paint these cars. And once you start seeing Sid's cars, anytime you see a chrome or a lacquery kind of paint, okay, and you see the environment reflecting off the car, that's not 3D rendering software. That's Sid in like the 60s doing this by hand. He had the ray casting 3D model in his brain. He is God. He is the sun. He is the physics of light. And once you see it, it'll blow your mind. I just went to a presentation of his the other day, and I saw it, the biggest I've ever seen. It was on a big theater screen, and even blown up. A painting that's maybe 18 inches by, or maybe 20 by 30. Well, not even that, geez. But it's like, about this big, blown up on a screen. You still see all this detail that if I said, hey, render it at that level, you'd be there all day trying to just get the basics finished right. But bird shitting is a real interesting thing, and some of you might have done it, which is light will reflect off of lines, off edges, right? And so it looks like a little string of little white reflection points. And it looks like bird shit on there. And he said, once we bird shit a drawing, which is a perfectionism last step, people would just fawn over these paintings. Like, oh my God, look how real it is. Look at those dots. Now, the interesting thing about this is that when Sid did this presentation, we were up at Art Center in Pasadena, which, for those of you who don't know, is the premier car design college in the world, right? And Sid's a graduate from there with honors. He was trying to talk to the students because they're going home and going into class, and they're using 3D rendering software. So they pencil it and pin it, and then they push it into a 3D model, and they rotate it, and they give it all these wild textures, and of course it looks phenomenal. But what Sid said was, at some point, in some derivative of what he said, he goes, look, you guys are relegated to the science of art, or science of light. You can't get very easily 3D rendering software to do art. You can only get it to do science. And so you're always trying to trick it to be sexy inside the lens, which is what the rendering is, right? But he goes, when I did it by hand, he goes, I did what was artistic. I controlled light. I controlled it in ways that light doesn't really work, but it looks better that way. And he says, you're losing your humanity by sacrificing everything you do into 3D rendering software. And I think that the compromise would be to render something out in whatever your favorite software is, and then push it into Photoshop, and then go back in with the Wacom and start doing bird shitting, right? Start doing things that just look better. Casting various warm, cold light sources on things without having it bounce on everything, which is what a scientific apparatus would do, right? Those are just some of the perspectives of some of the masters that I've worked with, What I would say is probably a good piece of advice and a good takeaway for you guys is to go look at the things that you think are master works of art, and I guarantee you they will self-educate you as to what the decision-making process was by the artist, and try to get it in the highest level of quality you possibly can. What does that mean? Well, if I said Rembrandt can teach you something about art, just rendering. When I went to the J. Paul Getty's Museum and finally saw Rembrandt face to face, 18 inches, 2 feet away, and I started looking at it. It was I don't know, it was just this guy in a piece of a breastplate. It was like one of his amazing portraits, but he had this breastplate with this brushed steel on his chest. The unbelievable perfection in this brushed steel with lighting on it and everything else. It hurt. It was so good. It was like, oh my God, how many years, how many decades would it take if I started right now to paint breastplate like that? And I think I'm pretty good, but holy mackerel. I would literally say if I had an 8-hour day job or 10-hour a day job to do nothing more than paint breastplate, I might be fortunate in 5 years at that level of dedication every single day, no days off, to get anything that looks like what he has. And he understood oils. He understood how it flows out of the brush, how the pigments blend or something, because it looked like a photograph. So get out your favorite stuff and take a look. Get into, if you're talking about any modern artists, get into their making of. The Gnomon Group, the Noman School of Art, has so many DVDs, and now it's all streaming because no one buys DVDs. I like to have things physically on hand. That way I don't have to have an internet connection. I could take it on vacation or something and play it on my computer inside the plane. I'm not sure if they allow you to download a video, but you get a subscription to this thing, and then you watch as much as you want. But there's animation schools online. There's all kinds of stuff where you can get into the masters and have them teach you things. So I want you to get out there and take a look at what inspires you. And as a side note, look at things that you couldn't imagine yourself doing and see if there's something in that as well. Because, again, the amount of people I know that own their own businesses are completely profitable and happy. When I say, well, how'd you get into this? They're like, well, it was actually a complete mistake. If you look at this, there's a beer company here in America called Three Floyds. And they also call it the 3 Fs. They make beer, and they're heavy metal D&D players, Dungeons and Dragons players. I would love to play a game with these guys. I don't even know where the hell they are, probably Oregon or Washington or something. But the guy walked into a brewery at one point in his life, in his 20s, late 20s, and looked at it and went, oh my God, I love this. And he got to work for them, and so he figured it out. And then he borrowed money and built Three Floyds, and they make this beer, which I've never drank. And his dream came out of a serendipitous experience. And that can be you. If you think about it, your whole life is a bunch of serendipitous experience, unless you're like Tiger Woods or Mozart, where their fathers pushed them into it, right? For most of us, it's all serendipitous, but we convince ourselves that the serendipitous experiences we had at our youth are our predestined methods of living life, and it's just not that way at all. So get out there and experiment with things. Perfectionism is the pain that comes after the fun. But again, for every single morsel or second of pain that you experience during a perfectionism thing, I don't know what the ratio is, but it's a hell of a lot more pleasure that comes from the pain. And that's why the masters do it. Sid is still revered to this day for every single drawing he did for Blade Runner, and every single drawing he did for Tron, and all of his U.S. Steel paintings he did in the 60s. In fact, there's nothing he did that he doesn't get revered for. So all the perfectionism he put in there is it's like an annuity of happiness that pays off constantly. And we all want to be in that situation. I know for a fact that most of you have at least one thing in your past that's a moment of your perfection, where even you look at it and no one else is going to be able to see it because it's just stuck in your drawer or whatever, but you see it and you're like, damn, I was good that day. Holy cow. I've got sketches that I've done of various things, and I look back and I'm like, wow, I was so in the zone so early in life, and I have to beat myself up a little bit because I let my skills languish. I was just so satisfied with that level of skill. I was like, I'm bored of this pattern of drawing photoreal stuff, and I was bored of doing surrealistic paintings, and I was like, what? Had I known Sid at the time, I would have taken that skill and moved it way, way deeper into his realm. So I'm doing that today. Anyway, you feel me. So this is a very loose episode on perfectionism, but I wanted you to hear it from a ton of different perspectives because it will make you very, very happy in life. If you haven't been already, mkultradio.com. These deep thoughts don't really blend well with the Facebook site, so the most I can offer you there is really the Deep Thoughts tab. But if you're just subscribed to the YouTube channel down here on the left to you, and on the right you can do the like. Really appreciate it because it helps people find these things. It seems, though, that the trend is that when people find the episodes, they really like them, except this one person who constantly fucking thumbs everything down. But we're getting a thumb downer in the first 5 minutes of the videos up there, so someone's just being a dick. But at least they're not doing it on every single one of them. So all those thumbs up will counteract that one thumb down. And I don't mind if someone watches it and doesn't like it. I don't even mind if someone watches it and comments down below, this is complete crap, don't listen to anything this guy says. At least that's an educated opinion. But if you dig it, please help spread this information around. Again, this whole deep thought exercise is trying to give society the tools to create a new society. If we're ever so lucky as to take this place back over and get rid of the evil on the planet, we have to know what we're doing. But we can influence it from art down. And that's what we all need to do. So again, thanks for listening. Take care of yourself and somebody else, and I'll see you in the next episode. Over now.